Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Jeff Murrin, and I am continuing my discussion of Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carry. The chapter I'm looking at today in this video is the chapter titled How to Tell a True War Story. I'm going to give you a little bit of, kind of an overview of my take on it, and then I'm going to read you a few passages from it that I think are significant, and then I'm going to sort of give you an example from my experience that sort of illustrates what I believe Tim O'Brien is going for. All right, so how to tell a true war story. This is another one of the metacognitive chapters that Tim O'Brien writes, in that he is reflecting on, yes, the war, of course the war, always the war, but he's reflecting also on what it is to be a writer, how to write or how to convey ideas, the best way to convey ideas, or the best way to convey, in this case, I believe, the idea rather than the specific accurate details. He indicates that there is a difference between the specific accurate details and the truth of a story. Okay, and so I want to get into that. This sort of reminds me, goes back to the chapter called Spin, where it was the first one where he really looks at, hey, I'm a writer. These are my ideas about writing, and I didn't mention this earlier in the Spin discussion, but when we tell a story, often the phrase, the old phrase that isn't used as much anymore but still holds true, is this person has the ability to spin a yarn. To spin a yarn is an old phrase, meaning this person has the ability to really tell a story and let a story just flow out from him or from her or whatever the case may be. And so here we have him discussing the proper way to tell a war story that is true. And there is some irony in here, because we have the battle between what is true and what is accurate. All right, so I want to read some passages from this to you. This is on the second page of the chapter, beginning after the first little break in the text there. He says, a true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude whatsoever. There is no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil. Okay. We hear war stories often. We have Memorial Day. We have Veterans Day. We've got all these days to commemorate, wars and the people who fought in wars, fought for freedom, fought for, a number of ideals. And a lot of times when we hear the war stories, we hear, there's this triumphant, moral that these people were fighting for, some greater good, some and often cases a tangible enemy that was worthy of defeat. And, we, the victors, are the ones who are of higher moral character. And our version of that which is right won out, and isn't the world better off because we did. He suggests that those stories are lies because it uplifts us and it makes us feel better for having heard them, better for maybe even supporting an effort as horrible as war or whatever. I mean, I don't want to get into his politics, and I don't want to speak for him. I'm just looking at the words on the page here, because it is a lot to say that a true war story has absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil. Those are pretty strong words when we're considering the truth of a story. He goes on to say, in any war story, but especially a true one, it's difficult to separate what happened from what seemed to happen. The idea of perception is reality. Okay? If this seemed to happen to me, then it is really what happened to me, because it is my perception of it. We know that when people tell stories, 2 people, 3 people may be involved, maybe even more than that, in several, in a circumstance or in an occurrence. And every single one of them seems to tell the story a little bit differently. They tell the story in that one person may consider some aspects of it more important than other aspects. And while another person might tell the story and highlight other aspects that person downplayed or whatever, because we all have our own perception of what took place and what was important within the context of what took place. I'm going to give you an example of that here in just a moment. Another thing he writes in here, in many cases, a true war story cannot be believed. If you believe it, be skeptical. It's a question of credibility. Often the crazy stuff is true, and the normal stuff isn't. Because the normal stuff is necessary to make you believe the truly incredible craziness. And I think it's potentially the idea that those of us who have not gone to war, those of us who are not soldiers, those of us who have not had to stare death in the face and live with that day in, day out, those of us who in some cases, in a lot of cases, we have the mundane life of 9 to 5, wake up, go to bed. We have that because of some people putting their lives on the line to fight. All we know is normal. And so if a story tells us only the horrible, crazy stuff, it's unrelatable to us. There needs to be some moral anchor, not moral anchor, some anchor of normality that we can latch onto, or else it will just seem complete fantasy to us, because we are out of touch when it comes to what their experiences are. Let me see here, flipping through here. Oh, there is this the heart-wrenching story of the water buffalo. If you're queasy or overly sentimental, the images of the water buffalo and the story there will you will probably find them quite disturbing, because they are. He says in here, war is hell. But that's not the half of it. Because war is also mystery and terror and adventure and courage and discovery and holiness and pity and despair and longing and love. The repetition of the conjunction there, polysyndeton, is the device there. Okay, as if It's all of these things, and it's just one thing on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, to where it just goes and goes and goes, and it just piles up all of these things, all of these emotions, all of these things that they carry. Then he switches to asyndeton, a lack of conjunctions here, the sentences following right after. War is nasty. War is fun. War is thrilling. War is drudgery. War makes you a man. War makes you dead. And it's interesting whenever he puts these sentences together without the conjunction, it to me makes the contrast of the two things that he's mentioning that much more stark. It is this, it is this. It is the best of times, was the worst of times. That type of structure right there, so that you can, those two are so far on the ends of two different spectrum, or ends of a particular spectrum, but those two ends are brought right next to each other without that conjunction there, so you can see that contrast more starkly. And then finally, towards the end, he says, a true story, well, that is a true story that never happened. He mentions that. And then he says, making up a few things to get at the real truth. Now, I've never been a soldier, never gone to war. Have told a story or two about some things that happen. One of the stories I always keep in my back pocket is a story of when I was in the city of Budapest and I was pickpocketed. Somebody stole money and documents and things right out of my pockets. But I caught him. I saw him do it. And as a result of seeing him do it, I quickly jumped into action. And there was a physical altercation on the sidewalk of a very busy area of Budapest, Hungary. And it was a very heightened, intense moment of my life. It was two local fellas and my friend Eddie, and when I tell the story, I've gotten it down to a science. There are certain parts of the story that I omit, or there are certain parts of what happened that I omit. There are certain parts of the story that I home in on. And there are certain parts of the story that I might exaggerate or embellish somewhat. And I don't do that because I'm trying to lie or I'm trying to make the circumstance be something, the circumstance that I'm conveying, because I want it to be different. I actually want it to be more accurate. If I just told the details that my money was stolen, I started yelling, got a little physical with the guy who did it, there was a bit of an altercation, then you would say, okay, that's a weird story, that thing happened to you. But if I can convey that, I was worried that I might get hauled away by the authorities and be have to how would I say defend myself in a country where I don't speak the language, in a country whose language doesn't even have cognates with my own language, to where I just felt like there was so much going on in my mind of I need to get my money and my papers back. I need to get away from there. I need all of the concerns that were running through my mind. There was a heightened sense of anxiety with this, and I have to convey, for my story to be true, to be accurate, I have to convey that anxiety. I have to convey the intensity. I have to convey everything. And that doesn't necessarily mean everything needs to be accurate. For me to convey what the story is truly about doesn't necessarily mean that I need to be accurate in the portrayal of every single solitary detail, because that's not really the point of telling a story. And so I think that's what he's getting at here, is that to convey what I want, you to understand as a reader, I'm going to give you the stories as accurately as or as truthfully as possible, because there's a lot of things that are internal here that I need to get out. And for you to get those things, the stories may not be accurate and don't need to be accurate, and in a lot of cases shouldn't be accurate. So that's where I think he's going with that. And I think it's a very, honest, strangely enough, honest yet ironic view of this storytelling. So keep that in mind as you continue to read. This is a wonderful book. And as always, happy reading.